Revenge doesn't always show up in fireworks. Sometimes it shows up in whispers, and when it does, it doesn't knock things over. It erodes them. Quietly. From the inside. That's the kind of revenge that doesn't just scar the ego. It dismantles it, and that's exactly what Machiavelli understood better than anyone else. Real revenge isn't about shouting, exposing, or demanding apologies. It's about creating a silence so profound, so well-placed, that it becomes psychological acid, subtle, untraceable, and slowly corrosive. Because the most effective form of vengeance doesn't make you look like the aggressor. It makes the other person slowly realize they were the villain in a story that no longer has you in it. See, when someone wrongs you, they expect a reaction. Anger justifies what they did. Pain confirms their control. It feeds their ego and wraps their betrayal in a tidy little story where they're still the rational one. But if you give them nothing, if you deny them a script to work with, now they're left with a blank page. And guilt grows best in the unknown. That's the first principle of silent revenge. Guilt doesn't come from the act itself. It comes from the inability to explain it away. Think about it. Someone lies to you, betrays you, leaves you, mocks you, replaces you. They come ready for fireworks. They brace for yelling accusations, tears, and when none of that arrives, when instead they're met with calm, quiet absence, something strange begins to happen. They no longer know where to place their story. They lose their "I had to do it because" line. Their narrative short circuits. This is where your power begins. You don't scream, you don't argue, you don't post dramatic quotes on Instagram or drop hints in group chats. You go silent, but not out of weakness. You go silent out of precision. Like a surgeon walking away with clean hands, not because the work wasn't personal, but because it's already done. Now let's be clear. This isn't ghosting. It's not a tantrum. It's not blocking someone just to get their attention. That's emotional, that's transparent, and worst of all, it's reversible. A silent revenge. A Machiavellian one is neither loud nor final, it's haunting. You withdraw, yes, but not in bitterness. You pull back with elegance, no closure speech, no parting shots, no tears, just silence. And the key is that this silence must look intentional. Not like you're avoiding conflict, but like you've transcended it. Picture this: they're waiting for your meltdown. And instead, they see grace. They expect chaos. And instead, they get stillness. They thought they'd be dodging blame. Instead, they're left alone with their own reflection. And the mind doesn't like that. Because now, you're not just the person they hurt. You're the mirror. They can't crack. They try to replay what happened, but it keeps glitching. Why didn't you explode? Why didn't you defend yourself? Why didn't you say anything? And that's when the questions begin. Was I wrong? Did I overreact? Were they stronger than I thought? This psychological instability is the beginning of their unraveling. Because here's the truth: people can recover from a confrontation. What they rarely recover from is being forgotten by someone who had every reason to scream, but didn't. And this is where your silence becomes strategic. You don't make yourself the villain. You don't make yourself the victim. You just vanish. Not into bitterness, into mystery. The absence becomes the punishment. Every day that goes by, they expect to hear from you. Some angry message, some sarcastic post, something, anything. But the longer that silence holds, the more uncomfortable it gets. Because people are wired to seek resolution, and when resolution doesn't come, the guilt starts to mutate. It turns from discomfort into obsession, from rationalizing to self-blame. They might tell themselves they did the right thing, that you were too sensitive, that it had to end. But the problem is, none of those things match your reaction, because your reaction didn't fit their narrative. And now their memory of you starts to glitch. Because if you were so difficult, why were you so calm when they left? If you were so needy, why didn't you beg them to stay? If you were so unstable, why does your absence feel so grounded? They don't get to leave thinking they won. They leave wondering if they even understood what they were walking away from. That doubt. That's what Machiavelli would call the seed. And the more you leave it alone, the more it grows. Because guilt doesn't bloom when you chase someone down. It blooms when you step back and let them feel the weight of what they did without you interrupting the silence. So remember, your first move is not retaliation. It's disappearance, not a dramatic one, a precise one. No goodbyes, no slammed doors, just a quiet shift in temperature. You stop explaining, you stop engaging, you stop playing their emotional game altogether. And now, you're no longer a participant in their life. You're a question mark. And people don't move on from question marks. They replay them, they obsess over them, they build alternate endings for them. And in all those stories, you're still there not as a presence, but as a haunting. Because when you don't respond, they don't just lose access to you. They lose access to the version of you they could make sense of. And now, they're left with silence. And silence is where guilt thrives. Here's where things start to turn, not in the moment of silence, but in what comes after. This isn't about holding your breath and hoping they notice you're gone. It's about contrast, the kind that doesn't shout, "I'm better now," but instead calmly radiates, "I was never broken." You've disappeared from their world, but your next move is not to stay hidden. It's to resurface, just not for them. This is what Machiavelli would call the contrast phase. You don't resurface with vengeance. You resurface with elegance, with stability, with strength. And here's the trick most people miss. You don't look like you're trying to look better. You just are. You're not posting revenge body selfies. You're not updating cryptic captions. You're not subtly tagging new people to make a point. That's amateur hour. Instead, you show up in life with a quiet confidence. You focus on real things, your work, your craft, your fitness, your friendships. You don't glow out of spite. You glow out of alignment. And now they see something they weren't ready for, you unbothered. Not pretending, not flexing, just whole. This alone starts to break their mental scaffolding, because now they're stuck with a loop they can't escape. I hurt them, but they didn't fall apart. And every piece of visible strength you display chips away at the story they built to protect their ego. This is what silent revenge looks like in public grace. Not performance, presence. And when they see it, it doesn't feel like watching someone move on. It feels like watching someone rise. And that's unbearable to someone who thought they had power over your peace. But here's the part that takes discipline you don't return. Not even a little. Not even in disguise. Don't send that "hope you're well" text. Don't reply to the story they posted for your attention. Don't circle back just to check in. Because Machiavellian silence only works if it's sustained. Break it too soon and the spell is broken. The guilt evaporates. They get their closure, their justification, they're out. Don't give them that. Because the more you stay silent, the more they become the one who's haunted. Now they're not just confused, they're watching, waiting, stalking your social media for clues, asking mutual friends what you've been up to, reading between every line, and every time they check, they find the same unbearable truth: you're fine. Worse, you're thriving. And it doesn't look performative, it looks true. They can't point to anything and say, "That's about me," because it's not. You've become a force that moves beyond them, and in doing so, you become what they never imagined: the best version of yourself without their presence. Now the real psychological torment begins. Because when someone who hurt you sees you flourishing without them, it destroys the fantasy that they were somehow necessary in your life. They were supposed to be the main character. Instead, they're not even in the next chapter. And the brain doesn't process that well. They'll replay every moment, every message, every argument, trying to figure out where they lost control. And when they can't find the moment, when they realize you never fought, never collapsed, never gave them a villain to point at, that's when guilt turns inward. It doesn't just tap on the door. It walks in and sets up camp. Because here's what Machiavelli understood: the mind can justify anything if it has a clear enemy. But take that enemy away and all you're left with is yourself. And that's who they have to sit with now. And it's not just about them anymore. It's about what other people start to notice. Because when you don't defend yourself, but your actions contradict their version of you, people talk. You're calm. You're composed. You're not posting emotional breakdowns or bitter quotes. You're just existing in a way that makes their accusations look flimsy. Now the story they told starts to fall apart, not because you fought it, but because you outlived it. Mutual friends start to rethink things. Wait, I thought she was unstable. I thought he was cold. But now they see you, grounded, real, unshaken. You didn't prove them wrong with a speech. You disproved them with stillness. This is why Machiavelli never believed in defending your name. He believed in outlasting the lie. Because the more consistent your piece becomes, the more others begin to see the cracks in the other person's story. And guess what? The betrayer sees that too. They don't just feel guilty now. They feel exposed. They start to realize no one else is talking about you with disdain. No one's validating the version of you they invented to excuse their behavior. And now, even the audience they were performing for has gone quiet. That's when guilt metastasizes. It's no longer just I hurt them. It's everyone can see I was wrong. And that leads to one of the darkest internal loops a person can fall into. They were calm. So why did I treat them like they were chaotic? They were kind. So why did I turn them into a threat? They never came after me. So what exactly was I running from? These are the questions that don't fade, because they don't have answers. And the more someone searches for answers they can't find, the more they feel the weight of what they did. Now the silence isn't just your absence. It's a mirror. A constant, invisible mirror reflecting everything they don't want to see. And here's the final twist. You still say nothing. You don't capitalize on their confusion. You don't drop a poetic quote to let them know you know. You let it simmer. Let it stew. Because guilt doesn't need your help. It just needs room. So you give it room. And in that space, in that strange echoing silence, you become the benchmark. The one who didn't collapse. The one who didn't retaliate. The one they can't forget. Not because you were loud, because you were gone. Now the silence has done its job. It's settled in like fog, thick, unavoidable, slow. They breathe it in without realizing it. They carry it from room to room. And here's the worst part, they still can't explain what they did. Not clearly, not to themselves, not to anyone. Because you never gave them a villain. You gave them stillness, and that makes their story fall apart in their own hands. They start remembering the version of you that didn't scream, that didn't spiral. The one who remained calm in the storm they created. The one who didn't need to win because they were already whole. They begin to recall the small details they ignored. The way you never disrespected them in conflict. The way you listened even when they were cruel. The way you kept your dignity even when they threw theirs away. This memory is what haunts them now. Because the more they replay it, the more they realize, you didn't deserve that version of me. And that sentence is brutal. It comes dressed as reflection, but it carries a sword. Machiavelli knew this effect intimately. He called it the inversion of power. When someone sees you with clarity after they can no longer reach you, when your absence starts to feel like judgment, not because you said anything, but because they can no longer deny what they did. And this is where the guilt starts to calcify into something worse, regret. They compare. They scroll through their contacts, meet new people, build new connections. But every new interaction becomes a contrast to you. Every new laugh feels less sincere. Every new deep conversation feels hollow. They search for what they once had and fail to find it. Because what they had was real. And now it's gone. The mistake they made isn't just about what they did. It's about what they lost. They gave up someone who was honest, someone who was present, someone who saw them. And now they realize they won't find that again. That's not vengeance. That's architecture. You built that, not with manipulation, not with drama, but with restraint, with control. with that strange silence that never needed to be broken. You didn't become their consequence through force. You became it through contrast. Because here's what haunts them most. You didn't look like revenge. You looked like peace. And now, every peaceful moment in your life becomes a quiet reminder of how far they've fallen from your presence, from your grace, from your world. This is why Machiavelli said, never interrupt your enemy when they are making a mistake. Because the more they try to move on, the more their memory of you ruins the attempt. They find themselves bringing you up in conversations. We just weren't compatible. They were too calm. It felt cold. But even as they say it, they don't believe it. Because deep down they know you were rare. And rare things don't scream for attention. They disappear and leave a hole that no noise can fill. Now they're in a spiral. Not the kind you can see. The kind that wakes them up at 2 a.m. The kind that sits quietly beside them when the room gets too still. The kind that whispers, "What if I was the problem?" That question becomes the soundtrack to their silence. And if someday they try to return, they won't do it with confidence. They'll do it with uncertainty. Maybe through a text. Hey, just checking in. Saw something that reminded me of you. They'll disguise it as curiosity, as civility. But it's not that. It's hope. Hope that you'll validate them. Hope that you'll give them a little emotional oxygen. Hope that the story isn't over. But Machiavelli would say, don't answer that door. Not with anger, not with coldness, with nothing. Because rejection gives them a plot. Silence leaves them in a maze. You don't say I've moved on. You don't explain. You let the unanswered message sit in their inbox like a ghost. That unread bubble becomes a mirror. They see themselves ignored, irrelevant, unnecessary, and worse, unmissed. And if they try again, you still don't react. No blocking, no unblocking, no games. You just remain emotionally untouchable. Because here's the truth. No one wants to say out loud. Most apologies aren't for the person they hurt. They're for themselves. To ease their guilt, to feel better, to gain closure. But Machiavellian silence denies them that. Not to be cruel, but to be complete. You don't owe them your healing. You don't owe them your forgiveness. You don't owe them a clean ending. What you owe yourself is peace. And peace doesn't always come with punctuation marks. Sometimes it ends with a breath, not a bang. You gave them grace once. They responded with ego. You gave them patience. They gave you punishment. You gave them love. They gave you justification. Now you give them nothing. And that, ironically, is what they'll remember the most. Not what you said, not what you did, but what you didn't do. You didn't chase. You didn't collapse. You didn't fight for a spot in a story they were already rewriting. You simply walked away with dignity. And that's what lasts. Because people don't feel guilty from conflict. They feel guilty from clarity. And clarity arrives when their story breaks, when their justifications fade, and when the silence you left becomes too heavy to ignore. That's how you become unforgettable. Not by staying in their life, but by becoming the part of it they can never fix. At this point, they've replayed the ending more times than they'll admit. Not because they miss you, but because they don't understand how you didn't fall apart. The silence you left behind doesn't feel like avoidance anymore. It feels like a verdict, and the longer it lasts, the more their mind tries to fill in the gaps. Because you never told them what they did wrong. You never gave them a list. You never said, here's how you hurt me. And that's the part they can't escape the mystery. It loops in their head like a question with no answer. They start looking for signs in places that never mattered before. The way your last message was worded, the day you stopped liking their posts, the exact moment your tone changed. They become investigators in a crime you never confessed because there was no confession to make. You just left. But it's how you left that keeps them awake. Not in rage, not in bitterness, not in need. You left like someone who discovered something they didn't see, something they still can't name. And that's where the punishment deepens. Because it's not just your absence that hurts them, it's the version of you that seems to be thriving without them. Every glimpse of your new life becomes a reminder of what they couldn't break. They thought you'd collapse. You evolved. They thought you'd chase. You vanished. They thought you'd beg. You upgraded your silence. And now their mind has no closure, no clarity, no way out. They try to rewrite the story again. We just weren't aligned. They weren't ready for someone like me. It's better this way, but those phrases feel like paper over a crack in concrete, because under the surface, the truth keeps pushing through. You were better than they allowed themselves to admit. You were the one who kept your cool in conflict. You were the one who offered grace even when things got messy. You were the one who never weaponized your pain. And now they feel the ache of comparison. Every new bond is filtered through the memory of you, not because you were perfect, but because you were real. And that kind of presence doesn't just fade. It lingers. It echoes. It haunts. And here's where Machiavellian strategy goes from smart to surgical. You don't interfere with their process. You don't hint, check in, or drop bait. You stay exactly where you are, invisible but unforgettable. Because when someone carries guilt, what they crave most is relief. A chance to be forgiven. A sign they're not the villain. A chance to reframe the story. But you deny them that rewrite. You let the silence harden like concrete, not out of cruelty, but out of clarity. Because here's the truth, if they truly felt what they lost, they wouldn't be trying to make it right for you. They'd be trying to escape what they feel about themselves. And that's not healing. That's selfishness. So you stay still. And the world keeps turning. Your routine tightens. Your circle gets stronger. Your habits sharpen. You stop chasing softness in people who only understand power. You stop explaining your heart to people who only listen with ego. And your life slowly, consistently begins to reflect a version of yourself they never truly met. They thought you were soft. Now they see structure. They thought you were fragile. Now they see fire. And the irony, you didn't become someone else. You became who you always were, minus their distortion. This is what makes guilt metastasize. It's no longer just about the moment they hurt you. It's about the realization that they never really knew you. And now that version, the real you, is inaccessible. They can't reach you. They can't fix it. They can't even name what they lost without sounding delusional. Because to the outside world, you're doing fine. There's nothing for them to grab onto. No story to tell, no proof that you're still affected. And that makes them look like the unstable one, the one who's still bringing you up, the one who's stuck. While you're silent, you're growing, you're gone. And that's where the psychological weight reaches its peak. Because now it's not just about missing you, it's about confronting themselves. And they can't do it. They distract, they overcompensate, they seek validation in new people. But nothing sticks. Because every time they look in the mirror, they're reminded of what they did and how you responded. Not with retaliation, not with drama, but with unshakable distance. And here's where Machiavelli would remind you, don't collapse now. Don't message them. Don't unblock them. Don't watch their stories, because any sign of interest relieves the pressure. It gives them an emotional oxygen mask. It tells them you're not a monster. They still care. You didn't do that much damage. Don't give them that story. Instead, keep becoming more difficult to explain. Let your life grow so steadily that it creates friction in their memories. Let your calm presence contrast with their messy narratives, and let the silence say everything you never needed to say out loud. Because eventually, they will talk. They'll tell people their version of what happened. They'll say you were cold or distant or too proud. But as time goes on, people will see through it. Not because you defend yourself, but because you don't. That's the final act of silent revenge, letting the truth speak through contradiction. You never said a word, and yet your energy exposes them. You never gave an explanation, and yet your growth erases their version of events. And the people who matter, they'll notice. Not right away, but eventually your silence will begin to echo in all the spaces where noise used to live. And that echo, that's what they'll remember. Not the drama, not the goodbye, but the void you left, and the peace they never got back. Let's take it to the final level, the phase that Machiavelli himself would admire most, the psychological residue. This is where silence becomes something more than an absence. It becomes a presence, one they can't escape. Because you didn't just walk away, you became the standard. Not the ex, not the friend they lost, not the chapter they closed. You became the internal benchmark, the impossible comparison, the bar they'll never quite reach again. Every new person in their life is now measured against your calm, your grace, your refusal to break. And here's the irony, they may not even realize it at first, but the symptoms start to show. They find themselves more reactive than before, more suspicious, less trusting. They wonder why they feel disoriented even when things are going well. And it's because your ghost is still there, not haunting them through spite, but through contrast. See, most people don't suffer from what you did to them. They suffer from what they now realize they did to themselves. Because if you had screamed, they could have painted you as unstable. If you had begged, they could have painted you as desperate. But you did neither. You just evolved. And evolution, when it happens, silently becomes a kind of judgment, not moral, existential. They feel it when they walk into a room and realize they're still performing. They feel it when they're complimented and it doesn't hit the same way. They feel it when someone tries to love them and all they can think is, this doesn't feel as deep. Not because you were perfect, but because you were present. And they remember that. Now they live in a paradox. They were the one who ended it, yet they're the one who can't move on. Because people don't stay attached to what hurt them. They stay attached to what made them feel something real. And real doesn't fade just because it's no longer accessible. So what do? They start seeking relief. They say things like, I've made peace with it. But their actions tell another story. They post quotes that don't land. They talk about growth, but keep looking backwards. They tell others they're glad it ended while secretly checking your digital shadow. Their lips say freedom, but their habits say unfinished. This is what happens when guilt turns into identity. They no longer just regret what they did, they regret who they were when they did it. That's the deepest punishment of all. You didn't make them feel guilty, they became guilt itself. And now they're left trying to outrun a ghost they created. Here's what they'll never say out loud. They wanted to be forgiven, but not because they wanted you to heal, because they wanted to escape what they felt. That's why Machiavelli warns, never offer that escape. Never give them a way out that they didn't earn. If they want forgiveness, let them find it within themselves. Let them do the work. Let them sit with the discomfort, the confusion, the silence. Because once you give them forgiveness, they haven't bled, for the spell is broken. They feel justified. They rewrite history. They say, see, it was mutual. We both made mistakes. And just like that, the guilt fades. The lesson dies. The memory distorts. So instead, you remain still. Not cold, not angry, just untouchable. If they reach out, you don't reject them with fire. That would give them closure. Instead, you reply with stillness. You say something like, I'm at peace with it now. That's all. No accusation, no sarcasm, no invitation to reopen the door. Just calm finality. And that line, that's the guillotine. Because what it really says is, I no longer need this to be explained. They're not even worth the energy it would take to unravel the past. They can't fix it. They can't redeem it. They can't even access the version of you who might have listened. That version is gone, and in its place stands someone who learned a brutal truth. Sometimes the best closure is no access at all. And here's where Machiavelli's mastery comes full circle. You didn't seek revenge. You didn't plot their downfall. You simply stepped back and let time do what time always does. It reveals. It rots illusions. It erodes false narratives. It forces people to face themselves. And when they do, they don't just miss you. They miss the chance to make it right. They miss the person who would have forgiven them. They miss the them they could have become if they hadn't chosen ego. That's the tragedy of it all. You didn't destroy them. You didn't humiliate them. You simply stopped being available to be misunderstood. And that absence, that quiet vacuum where love used to be. It becomes their sentence. Now when they enter new relationships, they bring the residue of you with them. The silence, the standard, the self-inflicted shame. They overcompensate. They promise too much. They flinch at triggers that were never yours to begin with. And sometimes, they sabotage the next connection, not out of malice, but because you are still there not as a person, but as a feeling they can't match again. And that's the final revenge. Not a scream, not a betrayal, not a big public confrontation, just quiet replacement. Not of them of the memory. You replaced their version of you with your real self, the one who didn't beg, the one who didn't need closure, the one who rose in silence and left them behind. And now they're the only ones still talking about what happened. You became untouchable, not through power, but through absence. And in that absence, you became eternal.